Tech Talk with Trevor Galbraith, a video podcast that features industry leaders and experts from the electronics manufacturing community. Recorded at major events around the world and from the studios of Global SMT TV. Now here is your host, Trevor Galbraith.
And welcome to today's Tech Talk. I'm delighted to be joined by a very influential panel, actually, of experts. We're going to talk about PCBs and the de-risking of the supply chain. So to my left over there, we have Mark Goodwin from Ventec. Nice to see you, Mark.
Hi.
And next to him, we have Mike Buetow, friend and colleague he's now running the PCBAA. Is that the correct?
The PCEA.
PCEA, okay, which stands for Printed Circuit
Engineering Association.
Absolutely. Okay. And of course, next to me, we have Gene Weiner from Gene Weiner International.
Hello, everyone. It's great to see all my friends again here at the same table.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we've got the right panel here to talk about this topic because you're all got very strong opinions on it. But let's start off with the views from the show. Gene, you said you've had a walk around and you're more surprised about what you didn't see than what you did see. So let's start off with that.
Well, walking around, what I expected to see was more automation, the real use of artificial intelligence, some advances in technology, but really what I saw was attempts to differentiate and make improvements starting and also the maturing of something after 15 years, which is the acceptance of inkjet application of solder mask. And everybody had a machine that said was the greatest in the world and better than everyone else's. And the one with the best claims turned out to be a prototype not yet in production. So that was interesting. Mm-hmm. Then we looked at consolidation.
Keep going.
On all of the things that we were looking at reshoring, advancing, adding HDI, UHDI, and substrates to our industry, both here in Europe as well as in the United States, as this has gone from Japan to Taiwan to mainland China, and the U.S. has gotten 2 generations behind. And what I saw here were the pieces of the systems that are required to do this, such as more vacuum etchants. I saw a lot of direct exposure machines. Once again, everybody trying to differentiate from everybody else, but nobody explaining how to do this. And you start looking and say, well, we have the CHIPS Act in the U.S., we have the wonderful approach here in Europe, each going separately, maybe it shouldn't be. But then I look at the machines and I say, where are the materials for this? I didn't see it. I didn't see the special resin-coated foil. I didn't see Angimoto build-up film, the type of things that we need for it. I didn't see the unique metallization things and the ones we have in the States not even working that well, except for 3 or 4 companies. Then I walked on and I said, okay, how are we doing on assembly? So I walked over to that hall, and once again, ASMPT had a football field full of people. I didn't see anything new there. Everyone was there happily having a sandwich or a drink. Moved around. Yamaha, which usually is great in pick and place, still trying to be fastest, but Fuji beats them out still. So it's a change of speed again, but nothing really innovative. And I walked over to the other than the Yamaha motorcycle once again on display. Then I walked over to inspection. Now there was something interesting. Not only did we see everyone trying to differentiate themselves, but actually there were some that did, not necessarily in performance by in describing their equipment. We have 5 cameras now, so we get a better 3D image. But what do you do with it? You don't know how to do that. But then I saw in another booth the ability to properly inspect micro deposits of solder paste for micro BGA. That was different. That's the first really different thing I saw. Then I kept walking on into this hall, and once again saw a repeat. But in summary, I didn't see anything that comes together that would put Germany, the Euro, or the U.S. on the entire supply chain, from concept to finish, from equipment, from materials to process to chemistry. That was disappointing, but no more so than in the U.S. yet.
Right. Now, I think there's obviously a lot of bits still missing. It's a work in progress. But, I was down in Mexico a couple of weeks ago, and I saw a lot of automation and robots down there. I mean, so it seems to be in that particular territory, they're certainly going more on the robotic foot. But over here, I agree with you. I haven't seen as much of it in place. Mike, what have been what's your view on this?
Well, so I would agree with Gene that the level of conversation about artificial intelligence and automation hasn't really matched what we see on the show floor.
Right.
In particular, I'll give an example. There was an inspection company that has this nice, beautiful presentation about artificial inspection. I mean, that sort of leads the whole commentary. And then as you get down into the weeds, they talk about something called overhead automatic inspection. And the overhead refers to the operator intervention, right? Which is obviously incongruous with artificial intelligence and in particular with automation.
Right.
So, what I think we're in this sort of cycle where we go through equipment advances and then software advances and equipment, then software, and I don't know which leads which, but right now we're seeing the equipment side is actually getting more attention from what I've seen on the show floor than the software side in general. It's I'm talking about machine level software, not factory level software.
Right.
The level of automation that I think about when I think about what say the western part of the regions, the Europe and the U.S. are trying to accomplish, the level of automation simply isn't there and probably won't be there because of the mix of the products. I mean, if you're in Asia building SIP modules and you want to be able to have the cobots bringing material from 3 floors away to the lines are back to back to back to back for placement, and then it spits out, goes right to test again by cobot. That already exists and it has for several years. But whether that can be replicated in a high mix, lower volume area, the folks here are basically saying not yet. Maybe not ever.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I think that's where the challenge is with the high mix guys, because there are other activities going on the AI side with inspection, where there's 2 or 3 companies doing it just now, where they're working on an AI module where they're plotting the operator performance over a 3-month period, seeing the areas that he's doing repetitively well, and then locking that into an AI model and letting him free up to go and do other more interesting inspection areas on the board. So there are some things like that happening. But coming back down to of course, de-risking of the supply chain and the lack of materials, let's hear our disruptors' view, Mark Goodwin. I mean, because you're right at the rock face. I mean, you're working with these laminate suppliers and the people that are trying to maybe grow PCBs. There was not one large announcement a couple of weeks ago about a large PCB manufacturing company opening here in Europe. Yes, I think it was the first announcement in years, quite frankly.
And actually, we're in conversation with them, and they're looking really at supply chain, but they want to manufacture their PCBs. They're already an assembler. They want to manufacture their PCBs in Europe, but they understand that actually for the supply chain, for the materials at the level they want them, the supply chain all still starts in Asia. They want local support, but they want volume FR4 materials, and volume FR4 materials is no longer a European or a Western business in any sense whatsoever, and the raw materials behind it are certainly not a Western business. So they're moving parts of the supply chain back onshore. I personally believe that it's impossible to move the entire supply chain back onshore. It's gone. That ship has sailed. There's nobody around this table that is going to see that in their working lifetime in this industry, in my opinion.
Well, okay, let me just say one thing here.
And that's not to say things around the edges won't come back.
Okay. But I mean, let's remember that this whole initiative, this whole initiative of reshoring and getting a competence in the United States and Europe is driven by government. And if they've got the will to want to make that happen, they've certainly got the resources to make that happen. Well, financial resources at least, not the human capital. You're right, the human capital. But then, of course, that's just a case of going in reverse. So if you remember 20 years ago when we sent everything to Asia in the first place, we sent a whole load of Western engineers with it to go and teach everybody how to implement the systems and support them. In fact, if you go to Eastern Europe, there's still the Scottish Mafia there, which were the guys that used to run the Scottish factories back in the day over 20 years ago. So it's just going to go in reverse, presumably, and you're going to get some Chinese engineers coming over this way.
Maybe. Do you see that happening right now?
Well,
Are we training our own engineers?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
I don't think so.
There's a conference coming up next month in Juarez, in northern Mexico. The first 2 days are in English and Spanish, and the third day is in Chinese. So I'm guessing there's enough Chinese engineers out there that are going to want to go to that conference.
Mexico's an interesting situation. But first of all, are domains corporate or government? And I believe they're more corporate than government these days. But in Mexico, in Querétaro, which is their aerospace center, everyone thinks Guadalajara. Querétaro, about 160 miles from Mexico City, with a few million people, 5 universities, and protection of the government and army, no cartel problems, high-speed rail to Mexico, is really growing for the EMS part. And so I was called by a few remaining large American companies, say, what do you think about setting up PCB fabrication in Mexico? I said, I think it's a great idea. There are 3 small shops, and you have a huge burgeoning assembly business and aerospace, and it should be done. They said, well, what about the water problem? I said, well, there are 17,000 water desalination units in a dozen or so countries that are running efficiently, and Mexico certainly has the water capability in the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans to desalinize and get all the water they need. And some of the new technology, one of which was shown here, waste treatment, shows a complete recycling, almost total elimination of pollutants from our type of industry. So I think Mexico is another alternative between the two countries.
Yeah, there was a party of people came from Taiwan a few months ago, actually, down to look at southern Mexico. When I'm talking about the chip guys, TSMC and these big fellas, but they were concerned about the water. But apparently, there's a lot of water in the southern border area of Mexico.
So I want to amend something that you said. You know, you mentioned earlier that government is driving the reshoring. Or I would argue that industry has been driving it, and has been driving it for years.
Yes.
Government's reacting to industries, both the industry driving it, and also government's reacting to industry reminding itself that we don't have secure supply chains in these key regions.
That's correct. But I mean, this whole thing started out as a bit of a spat between the US and China on a political level. It turned into a de-risking of the supply chain, which is a corporate, industry level, basically.
A bit of a spat has turned into a major geopolitical issue for trade and industry around the world.
And I actually wonder, you mentioned about Chinese engineers coming over to re-educate people here. Because it's a political spat, is that going to be allowed to happen? There are already visa issues from people in China trying to travel to this trade show and to trade shows in America.
And that could all change very quickly after the American election next year.
Well, there's a perfect example. TSMC is on time with their new factories. In Japan, they're going to build a second one beyond what they had committed. They're a year behind schedule in Arizona, and have decided the only way to solve that problem is to staff it with Taiwanese for half of the staff. And so they'll be shipping people from Taiwan to live and work in Arizona.
Yeah.
And then let's add a couple other layers to this, right? So, if you're looking at, if the problem we're trying to solve is the de-risking of the supply chain, there is the government regulations, as mentioned. In addition to that, whether they're incentivizing or not, is also the sometimes the incongruous statements that they're making or rules that are in place. For example, I want to build a board fabrication site. Right. I've got to get all the wastewater treatment permits. I got to get the building permits. I have to get buy-in from the community itself, which isn't government, but rather, do we want this in our backyard? Because we've been told for 35 years that this is poisonous stuff. Yes. All the waste handling, is it closed loop? So there's so much that has to go into that before you even start building panel one. Right. And it takes more than just the federal government to say this is what we want to do. You know, it has to go all the way down to the municipality level. That's way more complicated. You know, right now, government policy doesn't match the government's goals.
Right.
Okay, and they have to get aligned.
I agree.
And then there's the working capital issue, not just the labor pool, but the working capital issue.
Yep.
You know, we have so much money tied up in inventory already. And I mean, you know, you guys and your customers, right, are saying, I can't take any more right now because I've already got this much on the shelves. So are we going to reset our expectations for what working capital is going to look like when we have these larger inventories we have to carry because we have buffer stocks or dual stocks, you know, all over the world? You know, that's a finance decision that has nothing to do with government, but has everything to do with Wall Street and the private equity guys and whoever else is controlling the money streams.
Right.
So these are real issues that all have to be discussed and resolved, at least, you know, locally, if not globally.
Correct. Yeah, and there's also sustainability issues as well coming into it because companies are looking a lot closer at these things. You know, but you know, I do think that there are certainly there's evidence of some companies looking at this and investing. I mean, for example, in Mexico again, we've got Cutzesa building a factory to build reflow ovens, as well as BTU building a factory to build reflow ovens. For the Mexico market, but in the case of Cutzesa especially, and BTU, it's also for the European market because it's a lot closer to Europe than it is to China.
Well, it also brings up the effect of unintended consequences because so many other things that are not out in the open view, as Mike said, are contingent upon where the raw material is, what pollution is caused there when you develop the raw material, not when you make and use it over here in Bavaria or in England or wherever.
Right.
And the pollution issue in some of those source countries is really horrendous.
Yes. Yes. No, I totally agree.
I love that you mentioned that, right? Because and you guys experience this too. What you have to go all the way back to the mines. You have to have visibility back to the mines, right?
Well, we have visibility back to our people making copper foil. They have to have visibility further back to where their feedstock's from.
So if
they want to make battery coppers cheaper.
Anyway.
And if we want to de-risk the supply chain, we need greater digitization. Okay, we need to, which means the visibility. Okay,
Yeah.
So you need to know as a manufacturer, you need to be able to see more than one level back. You know, not just to your distributor. You need to be able to go farther and farther back in order to really understand, what is happening in the supply chain. And those tools really don't exist for the most part.
They don't, and I mean that's
that
going to be
was
the issue in the
identified.
Scope 3 emissions. I mean, the Scope 3 emissions actually dictate that you have to know what your supplier is doing. You have to be able to trace all of that back and have them all sign into it.
Well, we're for particularly one of the consumable products, but also our own products, we're already there's legislation coming for Europe where we have to track the carbon cost and the environmental cost of our materials, and we're actually working on that now. And it's very interesting. A number of customers and potential customers are asking us how we're going to do that. And quite honestly, I'm not telling them because this is going to be part of our IP. If you can't do this, it's not my job to educate you. Educate yourself.
Are they willing to pay for that though?
No.
That's true.
There's the rub.
But also the onshoring story is also that. With the possible exception of some of the Millero guys, people are saying, yeah, we'd like to bring stuff on shore, but we still want the price that we were buying from in Asia. Well, okay, how?
Back to your goal. Resins come from organics. Organic comes from oil. Everything that you use starts as ethylene oxide.
Yeah.
And if that barrel of oil price goes up,
most
you're
copper
stuck.
is from recycled copper. So what was it before? It was recycled
copper,
dissolved in the baths and plated out for us. I have no idea. How does anybody track this?
Right. I mean, this is a huge topic. I mean, we've just literally just touched on a couple of the items in it. So I'm sorry to have lit the fuse paper in some ways, but we are running out of time because we've got panel discussions coming on. So I'm going to unfortunately have to end our discussion there. But I want to thank you, Mark Goodwin from Ventec, of course, Mike Buetow from PCEA, and Gene Weiner. Thank you all for coming in, and thank you to our audience for watching Tech Talk today.
Welcome to Tech Talk with Trevor Galbraith, a video podcast that features industry leaders and experts from the electronics manufacturing community.